A soldier betrayed by his comrade, only for the traitor to be abandoned in battle. Blood dripped from the tip of his blade as Corporal Adrian stared into the burning horizon. Smoke curled from shattered towers, and the cries of the wounded echoed across the battlefield. Yet none of this pained him as much as the weight crushing his chest. Betrayal. The man he had fought beside, the comrade who had sworn brotherhood, had turned against him. Betrayal did not come with a warning, it came like a dagger in the dark. Adrian's trust had been his downfall. He had covered for his ally, shared rations, and placed his life in his hands countless times. And now, when the army needed unity, his so-called brother had whispered lies to their commander, branding Adrian a traitor himself. Disgrace had chained him, exile had stripped him of honor, and death had nearly claimed him. But fate is crueler to the deceiver than the deceived. While Adrian staggered in the shadows, abandoned yet alive, the betrayer's path twisted toward destruction. War is merciless, and the battlefield remembers. This is not just a story of soldiers, it is the story of betrayal and retribution carved into the heart of war. Before the betrayal, Adrian and Castle were inseparable. They had grown from recruits into warriors, learning to trust the rhythm of each other's steps. Castle was quick with a joke and faster with a blade, while Adrian carried the weight of strategy and restraint. Together, they had survived impossible ambushes, endured storms that claimed whole battalions, and buried too many friends to count. The army saw them as a pair of iron and flame, one unyielding, the other unpredictable. Bonds like theirs were rare, forged not in words but in shared bloodshed. They ate from the same tin plates, traded dreams of peace when war was done, and swore an oath that no betrayal could ever tear them apart. Or so Adrian believed. War, however, is not just a crucible for courage. It tests greed, envy, and fear. Castle, despite his loyalty in battle, harbored an ambition too dark to remain hidden forever. Adrian's growing reputation threatened his pride. Whispers of Adrian's promotion stirred envy, and envy festers like poison. Had Adrian seen the shadow in Castle's eyes, perhaps he would have guarded his heart. Instead, he opened it wider, unaware that trust would soon become his greatest mistake. Envy rarely appears like a storm. It seeps quietly, like cracks in stone. Castle smiled beside Adrian, but inside he cursed the way the commander praised him. Every medal pinned to Adrian's chest felt like a blade stabbing deeper into Castle's pride. The night before the betrayal, Castle sat alone by the fire. The camp's glow reflected in his eyes as he thought of all the times Adrian had been chosen over him. Chosen to lead the squad, chosen to negotiate, chosen as the commander's right hand. He convinced himself that Adrian had stolen his chances. What had once been brotherhood was now suffocating rivalry. An opportunity came like a whisper in the dark. Castle was approached by spies of the enemy, a tempting offer of gold and power if he delivered a scapegoat. All they required was a single lie, a story to fracture trust within the ranks. He hesitated only briefly. Survival, ambition, greed, they drowned out brotherhood. That night Castle swore an oath not of loyalty but betrayal. The seeds of envy had grown roots, and by morning Adrian would feel the weight of a lie sharp enough to cut through steel. The dawn was red, and the commander's voice thundered like judgment itself. Adrian was dragged before the battalion, his wrists bound. Castle stood among them, his face carved in false sorrow. The accusation was brutal treason. Castle claimed Adrian had conspired with the enemy, sabotaging supply lines and leaking positions. The evidence? Lies stitched together with fragments of half-truths planted carefully by Castle. The commander's eyes burned with disappointment, and Adrian's protests were drowned by jeers. He shouted for Castle, begged him to tell the truth, but Castle's silence was louder than any denial. The men Adrian had bled beside turned away, their trust shattered by the poison of one man's words. No trial, no chance, just condemnation. Adrian was stripped of rank, his sword broken before him. In that moment he did not feel anger but emptiness. The brother he had trusted had destroyed him with a single betrayal. As soldiers dragged him away, Adrian's gaze locked with Castle's. For the briefest second he saw hesitation, perhaps even guilt. But guilt is a coward, it hides behind ambition. Adrian was cast out, abandoned in the wastelands, left to die without honor or a name. Adrian was thrown into the wastelands beyond the camp's borders, a barren stretch where no man survived for long. Stripped of weapons and dignity, he wandered beneath a sun that scorched his skin and nights that froze his bones. Hunger clawed at him, and thirst cracked his lips. He should have died there, nameless and forgotten. But Adrian's spirit was forged by fire. Even stripped of everything, he clung to one truth. Betrayal had not ended him, it had transformed him. Each step he took was not for survival alone but for vengeance. The memory of Castle's deceit burned hotter than the desert sun. Days stretched into weeks. Adrian scavenged roots, drank from stagnant pools, and fought scavenger beasts with nothing but sharpened stones. His body weakened, but his resolve hardened. He replayed Castle's smirk, the commander's disappointment, and the soldiers' accusing stares. Each memory carved another line of determination into his soul. By the time he stumbled upon a ruined village on the edge of the wasteland, Adrian was no longer a castaway. He was a man reborn in suffering, and the fire in his heart had only one name left to consume: Castle. While Adrian endured exile, Castle basked in false glory. With Adrian gone, he stepped into the role once destined for his comrade. The commander praised his loyalty, and the soldiers hailed him as the one who had rooted out treachery. Medals adorned his chest, promotions filled his pockets, and whispers of his bravery echoed through the camp. But glory won through betrayal is fragile. Though Castle smiled, he could never silence the ghosts of his choice. At night he dreamt of Adrian's accusing eyes, haunting him like a shadow he could not shake. Yet each morning the sun rose, and with it came more recognition. Power soothed his guilt for a while. Still, war is not a place for comfort. The battles grew bloodier, the enemies stronger, and the commander relied more heavily on Castle to lead. Soldiers followed him, but not with the same trust they had given Adrian. They obeyed, yes, but they did not believe. Deep down, Castle knew the truth. He was no Adrian. The burden of leadership weighed heavier than the medals on his chest, and while Adrian's name was erased from history, the memory of his loyalty lingered like an unspoken comparison. Far from the main camp, Adrian found the ruined village nearly swallowed by ash and silence. Burned homes, shattered wells, and broken banners told stories of battles long forgotten. Among the rubble he found fragments of weapons, scraps of armor, and bones bleached by time. Yet in this desolation, Adrian discovered his salvation. The village was not entirely empty. A handful of survivors, outcasts, deserters, and orphans of war, hid among the ruins. They were broken, scarred, and weary of life. Yet Adrian, even as a fallen soldier, still carried a presence that stirred them. They listened when he spoke of survival, watched as he fashioned weapons from scraps, and followed when he hunted beasts in the night. Slowly a new band formed around him, not bound by duty to a commander, but by loyalty to one another. Adrian, once cast aside, became their leader in silence. He taught them discipline, strategy, and resilience. Every lesson, every plan, carried a hidden purpose. He was not just building survivors, he was preparing an army. And though he never spoke Castle's name aloud, his eyes burned with it. Adrian's revenge would not come alone. It would come with the force of those who believed in him. Back at the camp, whispers began to circulate. Soldiers spoke of Adrian's ghost wandering the wasteland, a shadow haunting the edges of battlefields. Patrols returned with tales of ambushes in the night, weapons stolen, and enemy scouts mysteriously eliminated. No one saw his face, but the style was unmistakable. It reminded them of Adrian's tactics. Castle dismissed these stories with laughter, but unease grew in his heart. He knew Adrian's resilience better than anyone. The thought that Adrian still lived gnawed at him, poisoning his victories with dread. Every skirmish became a nightmare, every shadow a threat. The commander, too, began to wonder. Adrian's absence had left a void that Castle could not fill. Soldiers murmured that they fought harder when Adrian led, that their fallen comrade had been wrongly condemned. Suspicion is a dangerous seed in an army. It spreads faster than fire through dry grass. Castle tightened his grip on authority, punishing those who questioned him. Yet the harsher his rule became, the more his men resented him. He had taken Adrian's place, but he could not take his spirit, and somewhere in the wastelands, the forgotten soldier sharpened his blade, waiting. War reached its breaking point. The enemy launched a massive assault, forcing Castle's battalion into the bloodiest battle yet. Chaos reigned, arrows darkened the sky, blades clashed like thunder, and screams of the dying swallowed the air. Castle stood at the center, desperate to maintain control. But the soldiers no longer fought with conviction. Their trust in him had withered, and doubt corroded their strength. He shouted orders, but hesitation lingered in their eyes. In contrast, the enemy fought with unity, driving the battalion into disarray. And then, like a storm out of legend, Adrian appeared. Leading his band of wasteland survivors, he struck the enemy's flank with precision and fury. His return was like fire to dry tinder. His presence reignited the soldiers' courage. For a moment the tide of battle shifted. Castle froze at the sight. Adrian was alive, commanding with the same steady strength as before. The army that had cast him aside now rallied to him instinctively. Castle's heart pounded. torn between fear and fury. His betrayal had not killed Adrian, it had created something stronger. On that battlefield, their fates collided, and the war itself trembled at the reckoning to come. The commander, once convinced of Adrian's guilt, now stood paralyzed by the evidence before him. Adrian, alive, fearless, and leading men who fought with unshakable discipline, did not look like a traitor. His strategy saved dozens of soldiers that day, turning what could have been a massacre into a desperate survival. When the dust settled, Castle tried to reclaim control, barking that Adrian had staged the assault to appear a hero. But his words fell flat. Too many had seen Adrian shield the wounded, rally the hopeless, and strike down enemy champions with ruthless precision. The whispers grew louder, no longer about ghosts but about justice. The commander's eyes, heavy with guilt, lingered on Adrian. Had he condemned the wrong man? Had Castle deceived them all? Doubt seeped into the ranks like poison, unraveling the false image Castle had built. Castle's mask began to crack. His voice rose too sharply, his excuses too desperate. Soldiers exchanged glances, their loyalty shifting like tides pulled by a stronger moon. Adrian said little, but his silence spoke volumes. He was not there to argue for his innocence. He was there to fight, and in fighting he revealed the truth that Castle could no longer bury. For the first time since his betrayal, Castle felt powerless. Adrian's presence consumed the battlefield, eclipsing him entirely. The soldiers who once cheered Castle now looked past him, their eyes fixed on Adrian. Fear tightened Castle's throat. Fear not of the enemy but of being exposed. That night, as the camp smoldered from the day's battle, Castle sat alone in his tent. His thoughts swirled with dread. If the commander realized the truth, execution awaited. If the soldiers turned against him, mutiny would claim his life. He had built his power on lies, and now those lies trembled under Adrian's shadow. Sleep evaded him, replaced by visions of Adrian's cold stare. He remembered their brotherhood, their laughter, their vows, but instead of guilt, anger consumed him. Why had Adrian survived? Why had fate refused to finish what he had started? Fear twisted into rage. Castle decided that if Adrian lived, his own downfall was inevitable. Only one solution remained: to finish what he had begun. Adrian had to die, not by exile or whispers, but by Castle's own hand. But fate has a way of turning hunters into prey, and in plotting Adrian's end, Castle had already set the stage for his own destruction. Adrian spoke little in the days that followed the battle. He moved through the camp like a ghost, commanding respect without demanding it. Soldiers approached him, offering food, weapons, and loyalty once denied. He accepted their gestures with quiet nods but never asked for allegiance. Adrian understood something Castle never would. Loyalty cannot be forced, it must be earned. He trained his band of survivors alongside the weary battalion, teaching them tactics sharper than steel. His strategies made sense where Castle's orders faltered. The men listened, not because they were commanded, but because Adrian gave them hope. Yet Adrian's silence was not forgiveness. He bore no illusions about Castle. His heart did not yearn for reconciliation, it demanded justice. Every scar on his body, every sleepless night in the wasteland, was a reminder of betrayal. Adrian did not plot revenge in the shadows. He waited. He knew war would provide the moment when Castle's facade would crumble. And when that moment came, Adrian would not strike with anger but with the calm precision of truth. He was no longer the betrayed soldier. He was the reckoning Castle could not escape. The army marched into another brutal campaign, driven into enemy territory. The commander placed Castle at the helm, but even he hesitated, his doubt plain. Soldiers obeyed, but Adrian's presence loomed like a silent judge among them. The breaking point came when Castle led them into a disastrous ambush. Arrows rained, men fell, and panic spread like wildfire. His orders were reckless, his decisions clouded by desperation. As chaos consumed the battlefield, it was Adrian who stepped forward, rallying the broken lines, guiding men to safety, and striking back with calculated ferocity. The contrast was undeniable. Where Castle sowed confusion, Adrian restored order. Where Castle's pride endangered lives, Adrian's resolve saved them. Whispers turned to open defiance. Soldiers began ignoring Castle's commands, following Adrian instead. Even the commander watched in silence, realizing the bitter truth. He had condemned the wrong man and trusted the wrong one. Castle, cornered by his own failures, lashed out with venom. He blamed Adrian for undermining him, accused him of staging ambushes to seize glory. But no one believed him anymore. The weight of truth had shifted, and Castle's power slipped like sand through his fingers. His betrayal was unraveling, and Adrian had not lifted a single blade against him. The final test came when the army clashed in a siege unlike any before. Flames consumed the battlefield, towers crumbled, and screams of the dying echoed into the night. Amid the inferno, Castle's cowardice was revealed. When the walls fell and the enemies surged forward, Castle faltered. Fear overwhelmed him, and instead of leading, he fled. He abandoned his men, leaving them to die in the blaze. His soldiers, once deceived, saw him for what he truly was, not a leader, not a brother, but a coward hiding behind lies. In the chaos, Adrian stood firm. With sword in hand and fire at his back, he fought alongside the men, not above them. They followed him without question, not because he demanded it, but because he embodied the courage they needed. Castle stumbled into the flames alone. His cries for help drowned by the roar of battle. No soldier turned to save him. No hand reached out in mercy. He had betrayed trust, and now trust abandoned him. As the battle raged on, Adrian did not search for him. Justice had already been served, not by Adrian's blade, but by the battlefield itself. Castle's fate was sealed by his own cowardice. Castle's screams echoed through the burning city, a haunting sound swallowed by collapsing towers and the clash of steel. He stumbled over rubble, clutching his scorched arm, begging for aid. But the men who once followed him turned their backs. They remembered the countless times he had berated them, forced them into needless danger, and claimed glory stolen from others. Now they offered him the silence he deserved. Adrian, leading the remnants of the battalion, heard the cries but did not flinch. To him, Castle was no longer a brother, no longer even an enemy. He was a ghost of betrayal, already dead in Adrian's heart. Mercy was not his to give. Justice had already claimed its due. When the last wall collapsed, Castle was swallowed in flame. No body was ever found, only ashes drifting on the wind. Some whispered that the fire had consumed him, others that he had fled into the shadows, cursed to wander as a coward forever. Adrian did not care which tale was true. Castle's voice had been silenced, and the army was free from his deception. What remained was survival, healing, and the heavy burden of truth. When the battle ended, the commander stood before the battered remnants of his army. His eyes sought Adrian, no longer with doubt but with shame. The man he had condemned had returned, stronger, unbroken, and the only reason the battalion still drew breath. The commander addressed the soldiers, his voice heavy. He admitted his error, confessing that Adrian had been wronged. The army roared in agreement, their loyalty shifting fully and finally. Adrian was restored not by decree but by the men themselves. They saw him as their leader, not because of rank or command but because of the truth proven in fire. Adrian accepted their respect with quiet grace. He did not seek revenge against those who once jeered him, nor did he gloat in victory. His vindication lay not in words but in the lives saved, in the justice delivered by the battlefield. Yet beneath the triumph lingered scars that no recognition could heal. Betrayal does not vanish when truth is revealed. It leaves shadows that haunt even the strongest heart. Adrian carried those shadows with him, knowing that honor restored could never erase trust broken. The betrayed soldier had returned, but he would never be the same. With Castle gone, the commander entrusted Adrian with command of the battalion. The men accepted him without hesitation, for he had already been their leader in spirit. But leadership is never without burden. Adrian now carried not only his own scars, but the weight of those who followed him. Each night he walked among the wounded, speaking quietly to men broken by war. They looked at him with respect, but also with hope, a hope that terrified him more than any enemy. Adrian knew the cost of betrayal, the fragility of trust. He vowed never to let them endure what he had suffered. Yet in private, Adrian wrestled with doubt. Had he truly forgiven himself for trusting Castle? Could he lead without letting vengeance cloud his path? His scars whispered reminders of exile, of hunger, of nights alone in the wasteland. He feared those memories would one day harden him into something less than human. But the men needed him, and war did not wait for healing. Adrian buried his pain, standing tall not as the betrayed, but as the leader they required. Inside, however, the shadows remained, silent and unrelenting. Word of Adrian's survival spread beyond their camp, reaching even the enemy's ears. They had expected a broken army, led by a coward. Instead, they now faced a force reborn under a man forged in betrayal and fire. Adrian's strategies became nightmares for them, ambushes that struck with surgical precision, defenses that never faltered, and men who fought with renewed conviction. The enemy began to whisper his name with fear. They called him the Wraith of Ashes, a soldier who had risen from exile to lead like a specter of vengeance. Adrian wore the title reluctantly, but he understood its power. Fear was a weapon as sharp as any blade, and it weakened enemies before swords even clashed. In every battle, Adrian stood at the front, not to seek glory, but to ensure no man felt abandoned as he once had. His army followed with unwavering loyalty, their courage forged in the knowledge that their leader would bleed beside them. The enemy fell, city by city, until the tide of war shifted completely. Victory was no longer a dream, it was inevitable. Yet Adrian knew that triumph in war did not erase betrayal. Victory could not return what was lost. Though Castle was gone, Adrian often felt his presence. In the silence after battle, in the flicker of firelight on steel, he imagined Castle's smirk, the betrayal in his eyes. Sometimes he wondered if Castle truly perished in the flames, or if he still wandered plotting in shadows. But the truth was darker still. Castle lived on not in flesh, but in Adrian's memory. Betrayal leaves scars no blade can carve. It teaches distrust, it whispers doubt, and it lingers even in moments of triumph. Adrian knew that every time he trusted another, a part of him would remember Castle's knife in the dark. Yet he also carried another truth. Betrayal does not define the betrayed, it defines the betrayer. Adrian was not broken by Castle's treachery, he was remade, tempered like steel in fire. The shame belonged only to Castle, not to him. Still, in the quietest hours of night, Adrian would stare at the stars and wonder. Was Castle's soul condemned to wander as a coward forever, or had the flames consumed him entirely? No answer came, only silence, and in that silence Adrian found the strength to keep moving forward. The war ended in fire and ash, but Adrian endured. His men hailed him not only as a commander but as a symbol of resilience. He had risen from betrayal, exile, and despair, and turned suffering into strength. But Adrian did not celebrate. Standing on the battlefield strewn with both friend and foe, he realized that war offers no true victors. It only leaves survivors, haunted by ghosts of what was lost. He accepted his place not as a hero, but as a man who carried the burden of betrayal and the responsibility of leadership. Castle's fate remained uncertain, and perhaps that was fitting. Betrayers rarely receive the closure they crave. They are consumed by the very lies they create. Adrian, however, had found his closure in the loyalty of those who chose to follow him freely. As the sun rose over the ashes of war, Adrian whispered a vow to himself. Never again would betrayal break him. He was no longer the betrayed soldier. He was the survivor, the leader, the reckoning. And this was only the beginning. If you were captivated by Adrian's story, join me for more tales of betrayal, survival, and triumph. Subscribe for the next chapter in the saga.